My daughter-in-law just humiliated me in front of the entire town. I'm Tom Sullivan, and what happened next changed everything. She stood there at our harvest festival, telling 200 neighbors that farming was disgusting manual labor, and my son deserved better than slaving in mud for peasant wages. She wanted me to sell our family farm to developers for $2 million. What she didn't know was that I'd quietly bought her parents' underwater mortgage 6 months earlier, and they were 3 months from losing their house. Her family was broke, attacking mine for being poor, while I literally owned their financial future. The look on her face when I pulled out those foreclosure papers, well, let's just say she learned the difference between quiet preparation and loud desperation. You know, some of the most satisfying stories come from moments when someone completely underestimates you. If you've ever been in that situation, you'll love what happened next. And honestly, I'd love to hear your own stories in the comments. These kinds of family dynamics seem to happen everywhere. But let me tell you exactly how this played out, because the revenge was months in the making. The first sign I was losing ground came during our Sunday family dinners. Brittany started showing up with real estate brochures. "Look at this house in Omaha," she'd say, sliding glossy photos across my kitchen table. 3 bedrooms, granite countertops, no mud on the porch. My son Connor would shift uncomfortably in his chair. He works at the John Deere dealership in town. Good, steady job, but Brittany makes it clear that's not enough for her vision of their future. "Connor's wasting his potential here," she announced one evening, stabbing her fork into Janet's pot roast. "This whole area is just stuck in the past." I kept eating. 40 years of farming teaches you when to speak and when to listen. The second sign came when the developer's offer arrived. $2.1 million for my 500 acres. Brittany practically snatched the letter from my hands. "See? This is what I'm talking about." Her voice got that high-pitched, excited tone she uses when she thinks she's winning. "You could retire somewhere nice. Connor and I could get a real house. Everyone wins." I studied the paperwork carefully. The developer wanted to build a shopping complex, strip malls where my grandfather's corn used to grow. "Have you thought about what happens after the money's gone?" I asked. Brittany rolled her eyes. $2 million doesn't just disappear, Tom. But I'd done the math. After taxes, Connor and I would split maybe $1.4 million. His half wouldn't last 5 years with Brittany's spending habits. I'd watched her burn through Connor's savings on that BMW sitting in my driveway. "Besides," she continued, "it's not like this place makes real money. All that work for what? A few thousand a year?" Connor finally spoke up. "Actually, Dad clears about $85,000 annually from the grain contracts." Brittany waved her hand dismissively. "That's nothing compared to what you could make in the city." I watched my son's face. He wanted to defend the farm, defend me, but Brittany had spent 3 years convincing him he was somehow failing by staying here. The guilt in his eyes told me she was winning. That night, after they left, I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and my financial records. The farm was worth $1.8 million in land equity alone. The grain elevator contracts guaranteed income for the next 5 years. I had $400,000 in savings and investments that Brittany didn't know about. But numbers weren't the real issue. This was about respect. Brittany saw 500 acres of corn and soybeans. I saw my great-grandfather's homestead, my father's expansion, my own 40 years of 6 a.m. starts and midnight harvests. I saw Connor learning to drive the tractor at age 8, helping me fix the barn after the tornado in '98. More importantly, I saw what Brittany was really doing. She wasn't just attacking the farm. She was rewriting the story of our family, making Connor believe that everything we'd built was somehow shameful. The breaking point came when she started talking to Connor about intervention. "Sometimes you have to make hard decisions for people you love," I heard her tell him on the phone. "Your dad's too stubborn to see what's best for everyone." An intervention, like I was some kind of problem that needed solving. That's when I decided it was time to do some research of my own, not on crop prices or land values, but on Brittany's family situation. Turns out her parents, Janet and Carl Martinez, had been struggling since Carl's construction business slowed down. 3 months behind on their mortgage payments. The bank was starting foreclosure procedures on their 3-bedroom house in Lincoln. Funny how Brittany never mentioned that during her lectures about financial success. If I stayed silent and let Brittany push this sale through, I wouldn't just lose money, I'd lose everything that mattered. Let me paint you the real picture of what was at stake. This farm started as 80 acres in 1872 when my great-grandfather Michael Sullivan homesteaded here with nothing but a plow and determination. He survived the grasshopper plague of 1874, the drought of 1890, and the bank panic of 1893. My grandfather Patrick expanded it to 200 acres during the Depression, working for other farmers during the day and clearing his own land by moonlight. He paid for every acre in cash because he refused to owe banks anything after watching neighbors lose everything. My father doubled it to 400 acres in the 1960s, adding the cattle operation and building the red barn that still anchors our property. He taught me that land isn't just dirt, it's responsibility. Responsibility to the generations who built it and the generations who'll inherit it. I brought it to 500 acres in 1986, the same year Connor was born. While other farmers were leveraging themselves into bankruptcy, I bought land with saved cash and profitable grain contracts. 4 generations of Sullivans had built something worth preserving. Brittany wanted to turn it into a shopping mall parking lot, but the financial reality was more complex than she understood. The developer's $2.1 million offer sounded impressive until you ran the numbers. Federal and state taxes would eat $600,000 immediately. That left $1.5 million to split between Connor and me. His $750,000 wouldn't last 3 years with Brittany's lifestyle expectations. I'd watched her spend Connor's entire annual salary on clothes, car payments, and weekend trips to Kansas City. She treated money like it reproduced itself. My share would disappear into retirement costs and medical bills. At 64, I was healthy, but farming doesn't come with a pension plan. That $750,000 was supposed to last 20 years. Meanwhile, the farm was generating real wealth. My grain contracts with Nebraska Grain Cooperative guaranteed $85,000 annually for the next 5 years. The land was appreciating faster than stock market returns. Property values in our county had increased 40% in the last decade as corn prices stabilized. More importantly, Connor would inherit something tangible. Land holds its value. Shopping mall profits go to investors in Chicago. But Brittany had spent 3 years poisoning Connor against this reality. She'd convinced him that farming was somehow beneath his potential, that staying here meant accepting failure. "Your friends from high school are making 6 figures in Omaha," she'd remind him. "What are you doing? Fixing tractors and slopping around in mud?" She never mentioned that those friends were drowning in student loans and credit card debt, paying $2,000 a month for apartments smaller than our grain storage shed. The deeper issue was family unity. Connor was torn between loyalty to me and pressure from his wife. Every Sunday, dinner became a battlefield where Brittany chipped away at his confidence, made him question decisions we'd made together for years. If I fought back directly, I'd look like the controlling father who couldn't let go. If I stayed quiet, she'd eventually wear him down completely. I was watching my son disappear into someone else's vision of his life. The community stakes were equally serious. The Sullivan farm employed 6 seasonal workers during harvest. We bought equipment from Connor's dealership, grain storage from Patterson's welding shop, and supplies from 3 local businesses. Selling to developers would eliminate all of that economic activity. The shopping mall would bring in minimum wage retail jobs and traffic congestion. Progress, according to Brittany. But the real stakes were psychological. Brittany wasn't just attacking our livelihood. She was attacking our identity, making Connor ashamed of work that had sustained our family for 4 generations. Every time she called farming manual labor or getting dirty for nothing, she was teaching my future grandchildren to be embarrassed of their heritage. I'd spent 40 years proving that farming was sophisticated business requiring financial planning, weather analysis, futures market knowledge, and equipment management worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. My John Deere 8245R tractor cost more than most people's houses, but Brittany reduced all of that expertise to slaving in mud. The final stake was time. I was 64 years old. If I gave up the farm now, I'd never get it back. Connor would spend the rest of his life wondering what we could have built together. That's when I realized I needed to shift the conversation entirely. Instead of defending what we had, I needed to demonstrate what Brittany was really about to lose, and I knew exactly how to do it. The confrontation started over coffee on a Tuesday morning in September. Brittany had driven out to pressure me about the developer's deadline. "Tom, We need to be realistic here. She sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same table where my father had signed his first grain contracts. This offer won't stay on the table forever. Define realistic, I said. Realistic means accepting that you can't work this farm forever. Realistic means giving Connor a chance at a better life. I sipped my coffee slowly. Let her talk. Look, I know this place means something to you, but it's holding Connor back. He's 32 years old, and what does he have to show for it? A job at the tractor dealership in a farmhouse that smells like diesel fuel. Connor seems happy enough. Connor doesn't know what he's missing. Her voice pitched higher. He's never lived anywhere else. He doesn't know what real success looks like. And you do? I grew up in Lincoln. I've seen what's possible when people aren't afraid to take risks. Interesting perspective from someone whose parents were 3 months behind on their mortgage, but I didn't mention that yet. Tell me about these risks, I said. Real estate development, technology jobs, industries with actual growth potential. You mean like construction? Something flickered in her eyes. What do you mean? Your father's in construction, right? How's that working out for him? That's completely different. How's it different? Dad had some setbacks, but that doesn't change the fact that this farm is a dead end. I stood up and walked to my filing cabinet, pulled out a manila folder containing my financial records for the last 5 years. $85,000 in guaranteed grain contracts, I said, spreading the papers on the table. Equipment valued at $400,000. Land equity worth $1.8 million. Brittany barely glanced at the documents. None of that matters if you can't access it. I can access it any time I want. That's what equity means. But you won't, will you? You'll just sit here counting your money while Connor wastes his life. Connor's not wasting anything. He's learning to manage a $2 million operation. He's fixing tractors. He's maintaining equipment worth more than most people's entire net worth. That's when Connor walked in. He'd been working on the combine in the machine shed, his hands still dirty from grease. "What's going on?" he asked, seeing the tension. "Your father's being stubborn about the farm sale," Brittany said immediately. Again. Connor looked at the financial papers spread across the table. "Dad, are these the grain contracts?" 5-year guarantees with Nebraska Grain Cooperative, I confirmed. "Wait," Brittany interrupted. "You mean you've been sitting on guaranteed income and never mentioned it? You never asked about the business side, because I assumed there wasn't one." Connor picked up one of the contracts, studying the numbers. "Dad, this is actually really good money." "It's nothing compared to what you could make in Omaha," Brittany snapped. "Doing what?" I asked her. "Sales, management, real jobs that don't require getting dirty." "Connor, what do you think about that?" My son looked between his wife and me. The conflict was written all over his face. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I mean, I like working with equipment, and I like living here." "That's because you don't know any better," Brittany said. Wrong answer. I saw Connor's jaw tighten. Nobody likes being told they're too stupid to understand their own preferences. "Brittany," I said calmly, "help me understand something. If farming is such a dead-end business, why does this developer want to pay $2.1 million for farmland? Because they're going to build something profitable on it. Like what? Shopping centers, restaurants, real businesses. And who's going to shop at these businesses? People who live here. You mean farmers?" She paused, realizing the logical trap. "Look, Tom, you're missing the point. This is about Connor's future." "No, this is about your comfort level with how we make our living." "I never said that." "You called it slaving in mud for nothing just last week." Connor's head snapped up. "You said that?" Brittany's face flushed. I was making a point about opportunities. "By insulting our family business?" "Connor, you know I didn't mean it that way." But the damage was done. I could see Connor processing this information, realizing how Brittany really felt about the work that supported their lifestyle. "Brittany," I said, "I've been thinking about your parents' situation." The room went completely silent. "What about my parents? Carl's construction business must be tough when the building market slows down. Dad's doing fine." "Is he? Because I heard differently." Her face went pale. "What did you hear?" "That he's having some financial difficulties. Mortgage problems, maybe?" "Where did you hear that?" "Small communities talk, Brittany." People know when families are struggling. My parents' finances are none of your business. You're right. Just like my farm finances are none of yours. Connor was looking back and forth between us, sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. "What's going on here?" he asked. "Your wife has strong opinions about financial success," I said. "I'm just curious about her expertise." "Tom, you're being unfair." "Am I? You've spent 6 months telling Connor that farmers are failures. I'm wondering about your qualifications to make that judgment." "I don't have to listen to this." "No, you don't. But Connor does. This is his inheritance we're discussing." She stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse. "Connor, we're leaving." But Connor didn't move. He was staring at the grain contracts, doing mental math. "Actually," he said slowly, "I think I'd like to understand these numbers better." Brittany stared at him in disbelief, then stormed out. I heard her BMW engine roar to life in the driveway. Connor and I sat in silence for a moment. "Dad," he said finally, "what did you mean about Brittany's parents?" That's when I decided it was time to show my cards. After Brittany left, Connor and I spent the afternoon going through the farm's financial records. He'd never seen the complete picture before, just knew we were comfortable, never realized we were actually wealthy. "Dad, why didn't you ever show me these numbers?" "You never asked. And honestly, I wanted you to choose farming because you loved it, not because of the money." We were sitting in my home office, a converted bedroom where I kept 40 years of records. Tax returns, equipment purchases, land acquisition documents, grain contracts, the paper trail of a successful operation. "Look at this," I said, pulling out a folder marked Property Values. Comparable sales in the county over the last 5 years. Connor whistled when he saw the numbers. "Land's really worth this much?" "More every year. Farmland's become an investment commodity. Big companies are buying agricultural properties as inflation hedges." "But Brittany says..." "Brittany doesn't know what she's talking about." That might have sounded harsh, but it was true. I'd been doing some research on the Martinez family situation, and what I'd found was enlightening. "Connor, can I ask you something? Has Brittany mentioned any financial stress with her parents lately?" "No, why?" "Just curious. Her father's construction business. Do you know how it's doing?" "I think it's fine. They just bought a new truck." I didn't tell him that the truck was probably financed at 20% interest because Carl's credit was shot. Instead, I pulled out another folder. "I had lunch with Pete Richardson last week," I said. Pete was president of First National Bank of Riverside, my hunting buddy for the last 20 years. We'd grown up together, served on the school board together, watched our kids play football together. Pete mentioned some interesting things about the lending market. What kind of things? Construction businesses are struggling. Materials costs up, labor costs up, but people aren't building as much. A lot of contractors are having cash flow problems. Connor nodded slowly. Makes sense. Pete also mentioned that some local families are having trouble with their mortgages. People who overextended during the good years. I was planting seeds, letting Connor draw his own conclusions. "You think Brittany's parents are having problems?" "I don't know, but it would explain some things." "Like what?" "Like why she's so anxious to sell the farm. If her family needs money, $2.1 million probably looks pretty attractive." Connor was quiet for a long moment, processing this possibility. "Dad, you don't think you don't think this is about helping her parents, do you?" "I don't know what it's about, but I've learned to pay attention when someone's pushing me to make financial decisions quickly." What I didn't tell Connor was that I'd already made some financial decisions of my own. 3 weeks earlier, Pete had called me about an unusual opportunity. A distressed mortgage was coming available. The bank needed to sell it to recapitalize their loan portfolio. "Tom, I've got a $340,000 mortgage that's 3 months behind. Bank board wants it off our books. You interested?" "Depends." "What's the property?" "Nice house in Lincoln, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, good neighborhood. Owners are construction people having cash flow problems." I almost asked if it was the Martinez family, but Pete would have seen right through that. "What would it cost me?" $260. Bank takes the loss, you get the mortgage and the payment history. It was a good investment even without the personal angle. But when Pete mentioned the address, I knew it was Brittany's parents. I bought the mortgage that afternoon. Now I owned the financial future of the woman trying to force me to sell my farm.
The irony was perfect. Brittany thought she was manipulating a powerless old farmer. Instead, she was picking a fight with her parents' mortgage holder. But I wasn't ready to reveal that yet. First, I wanted to see how far she'd push this confrontation. "Connor," I said, closing the financial folders, "I want you to think about something." "What's that?" "This farm isn't just about money. It's about building something that lasts, something you can pass on to your children." "I know, Dad." Brittany doesn't understand that. To her, everything's about immediate gratification. She's not that bad. Maybe not. But she's about to learn that some people plan further ahead than she realizes. Connor gave me a curious look, but I didn't explain. He'd understand soon enough.
The Riverside Township Harvest Festival happens every October 15th, rain or shine. This year brought perfect weather, crisp morning air, bright blue sky, and just enough of a breeze to keep the dust down. 200 people gathered in the field behind the community center. Families from 5 generations of farming, kids running between booths selling corn dogs and funnel cakes, teenagers showing livestock projects, old-timers comparing stories about crop yields and equipment purchases. I'd been coming to this festival for 40 years, helped organize it for the last 20. This was my community, these were my people, and everyone knew the Sullivan name. Brittany had never come before, said it was too rural for her taste. But this year was different. This year, she had an agenda. Connor and I were manning the Sullivan family farm booth, displaying photos of our operation and samples of our corn and soybeans. Standard festival fare, letting townspeople see what their neighbors were producing. That's when Brittany showed up with her parents, Janet and Carl Martinez. I'd met them a few times at family gatherings. Carl was a thin, weathered man who looked like he'd been working construction for 30 years. Janet was pleasant enough, though she seemed nervous around me for reasons I was beginning to understand. "Tom," Brittany's voice carried across the field. She was wearing designer jeans and boots that had never seen actual farm work. "I want you to meet my parents properly." Carl shook my hand firmly. "Good to see you again, Tom. Beautiful farm you've got." "Thank you. How's the construction business?" A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "Up and down, you know how it is." "I do indeed." Janet smiled weakly. "We've heard so much about the farm from Connor. All good things, I hope." "Oh, absolutely," Carl said. "Connor's told us about the operation, the grain contracts, everything. Sounds like you've built something impressive." That's when Brittany cut in. "Actually, we've been talking about the farm's future." She said it loud enough for nearby booths to hear. "The Richardsons, the Pattersons, the Wrights from the grain elevator, people I'd known for decades." "Oh?" I kept my voice neutral. "Connor and I think it's time to consider new opportunities." "What kind of opportunities?" "Well, Tom, farming is such hard work, and Connor's got so much potential for other things. Sarah Wright from the grain elevator was setting up her display 20 feet away. She'd been processing our grain for 15 years, knew exactly how profitable our operation was." "Other things like what?" Sarah called over. Brittany turned toward her, pleased to have a larger audience. "Well, there are development opportunities, modern industries that don't require so much manual labor." The way she said manual labor made it sound like something shameful. Pete Richardson was walking by with his grandson. He stopped when he heard the conversation. "Manual labor?" Pete laughed. "Tom, didn't you just buy that new tractor? What'd that cost? Couple $100,000? $280, I said. "Right, that's some expensive manual labor." Brittany's face flushed slightly, but she pressed on. "The point is, Connor shouldn't have to spend his life getting dirty when there are better options available." A small crowd was gathering now. Word spreads fast at these festivals, and people love drama almost as much as they love corn dogs. Getting dirty? This came from Frank Patterson, whose welding shop had been building grain storage for us for 20 years. "Brittany, Tom's operation employs half the businesses in this town." "That's not the point," Brittany said, her voice rising. "The point is progress, moving beyond outdated ways of making a living." Sarah Wright stepped closer. "Outdated? Honey, farming is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Food doesn't grow itself." "I understand that," Brittany snapped. "But there are better ways to make money than slaving in mud for nothing." Complete silence fell over the group. You could have heard a pin drop in that field. 20 people staring at the woman who'd just called their way of life, slaving in mud for nothing. Connor's face went bright red. "Brittany, what are you doing?" "I'm trying to help your family see reality." "Reality?" Pete Richardson's voice was ice cold. "What reality is that? The reality that farming is hard, dirty work that barely pays enough to survive?" Frank Patterson laughed out loud. "Barely pays? Tom, didn't you just donate $20,000 to the new school gymnasium?" "Brittany," Carl Martinez said quietly, "maybe we should—" "No, Dad, someone needs to say this." She was fully committed now, playing to the crowd. "Everyone here acts like farming is some noble profession, but look around you. This is exactly what Connor and I are trying to escape." She gestured at the festival grounds, the families, the community that had supported each other through 40 years of good seasons and bad. This whole lifestyle is just stuck in the past. Getting up at dawn to work with animals and machinery, never traveling, never experiencing anything beyond these same fields year after year. It's not a life, it's a prison. The crowd was completely silent now. These were people who'd chosen rural life, who valued community and continuity and building something lasting. Brittany had just insulted everything they believed in. Janet Martinez looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. Connor was staring at his wife in horror. "Brittany, stop talking." "No, Connor, I won't stop. Someone needs to tell the truth here." "Your father has trapped you in this backward place, convinced you that manual labor is somehow respectable, when you could be making real money doing real work in a real city." That's when I decided it was time. I walked to my truck, parked 50 feet away, and pulled out a manila envelope from under the front seat. The crowd watched me walk back in complete silence. "Brittany," I said calmly, "you seem to have strong opinions about financial success." "I do." "And you think farming is a poor way to make a living?" "I think there are better options available." "What about construction?" Her eyes narrowed. "What about it? How's that working out for your family?" Carl Martinez went pale. Janet grabbed his arm. "What do you mean?" Brittany demanded. I opened the manila envelope and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "I mean this," I said, holding up the mortgage documents. Pete Richardson's eyes widened when he saw the bank letterhead. "Tom," Brittany said slowly, "what are those papers?" "These are mortgage documents for 317 Maple Street, Lincoln, Nebraska. Your parents' house." Complete silence. "I don't understand," she said. "I bought your parents' mortgage 6 months ago. They're 3 months behind on payments." The crowd was staring now, understanding dawning on their faces. "That's impossible," Brittany whispered. "Pete," I said, "would you mind confirming these documents?" Pete Richardson took the papers, examined them carefully, and nodded. "These are legitimate. Tom owns the Martinez mortgage as of June 15th. Brittany looked at her parents. "Is this true?" Carl couldn't meet her eyes. "Honey, we didn't want to worry you." "How much do you owe?" $340,000, I answered for him. Brittany's face went white. But you said the business was doing fine." "We thought it would turn around," Janet said quietly. The crowd was watching this family drama unfold, understanding the complete reversal of power dynamics. "So let me understand this correctly," I said calmly. "You think farming is financial failure, but your family is losing their house to foreclosure?" Brittany was speechless. "And you want me to sell my farm to bail out your parents' mortgage?" Still nothing. "That's what this has all been about, hasn't it? The pressure to sell, the complaints about farming, the talk about Connor's potential. You need money for your family." The truth hung in the air like morning fog, but I wasn't done yet. "Let me show everyone something interesting," I said, spreading the mortgage documents on our booth table. Pete Richardson moved closer to examine them. The crowd pressed in behind him. Farmers, business owners, neighbors who'd known my family for generations. "This mortgage," I continued, pointing to the relevant sections, "was purchased by Sullivan Farms LLC on June 15th, 2024. Purchase price, $260,000. Current balance owed, $340,000. Sarah Wright let out a low whistle. "Tom, you bought their mortgage at a discount?" "Bank needed to clear distressed assets. I needed a good investment." Frank Patterson was studying the payment history. "Looks like they missed March, April, and May." "That's right. By Nebraska law, I can begin foreclosure proceedings after 90 days of non-payment." Brittany found her voice. "You can't do this. This is family." "Family?" I looked around at the gathered crowd. 20 minutes ago, you called my family's four-generation farm slaving in mud for nothing. You told 200 neighbors that our way of life was a prison. I didn't mean you stood right here and said farming barely pays enough to survive. Meanwhile, your own family is losing their house because construction barely pays enough to survive. Carl Martinez stepped forward. Tom, we can work something out. I know you're upset with Brittany, but this is between you and me. Actually, Carl, this became everyone's business when your daughter decided to publicly humiliate farming families. I pulled out another set of papers. Pete, would you read the foreclosure timeline aloud? Pete reluctantly took the documents. According to Nebraska statute, foreclosure proceedings can begin after 90 days of non-payment. Notice must be posted for 30 days before sale. And how long have the Martinez family been behind on payments? 4 months. So foreclosure is legally justified? Yes. The crowd was absorbing this information. These were people who understood mortgage law, who'd seen neighbors lose farms during tough years. They knew the rules. Janet Martinez was crying quietly. Tom, please. We've been trying to catch up. How much would it take to bring the mortgage current? Carl did quick math in his head. About $22,000 in back payments plus penalties. And how long before you'd be behind again? Silence. Carl, your construction business is failing. You've got equipment loans, supplier debts, and no cash flow. Even if you caught up on the house, you'd be right back here in 6 months. Maybe, but there's no maybe about it. I've seen your business financial statements. More documents came out of the envelope. Pete helped me pull these when I was considering the mortgage purchase. Your business owes $87,000 to suppliers, $32,000 on equipment loans, and you haven't paid yourself a salary in 8 months. The crowd was getting a complete picture now. The Martinez family wasn't just behind on their house, they were financially destroyed. Which brings us back to the farm sale, I continued. Brittany's been pushing Connor to sell our farm for $2.1 million. After taxes, that's about $750 each. Enough to save her parents' house and business. Sarah Wright shook her head. So this whole thing was about money, not Connor's future. That's not true, Brittany protested. I want what's best for Connor. What's best for Connor, I said, is inheriting a profitable farm operation worth $1.8 million instead of splitting a one-time windfall that would be gone in 5 years. Pete Richardson was still studying the documents. Tom, what are your intentions here? Good question. The crowd was waiting for my answer. My intentions depend on Brittany. She looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean you have a choice to make. Right here, right now, in front of everyone. I gestured to the gathered neighbors. These people heard you call their way of life slaving in mud for nothing. They heard you say farming is a prison that Connor needs to escape. Tom, I was upset. You were honest. And now I'm going to be honest with you. I picked up the foreclosure documents. I can file these papers Monday morning. Your parents lose their house in 60 days. Janet Martinez gasped. Or, I continued, you can acknowledge that farming is a respectable profession that supported your family in ways you never understood. What are you asking me to do? Apologize. To Connor. To these neighbors. To the farming families you insulted. The crowd was absolutely silent. This was small-town justice playing out in real time. And then what? Brittany asked. Then we talk about reasonable payment terms for your parents' mortgage. Maybe a reduced interest rate, extended timeline, manageable monthly payments. Hope flickered in Carl's eyes. But if you can't acknowledge the value of what Connor and I have built here, I continued, then there's no point in negotiating. The foreclosure proceeds. Brittany looked around at the crowd, 200 faces staring at her, waiting for her decision. Connor finally spoke. Brittany, just apologize. These are good people. Connor, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You've been embarrassed by my family for 3 years. You think we're country hicks who don't know anything about money. That's not. It is true. And Dad just proved that he knows more about money than your entire family. Frank Patterson nodded. Tom's one of the most successful businessmen in the county. Sarah Wright agreed. The grain contracts alone are worth more than most people make in a decade. Brittany was surrounded by the evidence of her own ignorance. She'd attacked farming families without understanding the economics, insulted successful business owners while her own family faced financial ruin. "What's it going to be?" I asked quietly. She looked at Connor, at her parents, at the crowd of neighbors watching her decide. She started, then stopped. "Take your time," I said. "But the foreclosure papers are already drawn up. One phone call to my lawyer Monday morning, and it's out of my hands." That's when Connor made his own choice. "Dad," he said clearly, "I want to keep the farm." Brittany stared at him in shock. "Connor, what are you saying?" "I'm saying you were wrong. About farming, about Dad, about this community. I'm proud of what we've built here." The crowd broke into spontaneous applause. And that's when Brittany finally understood that the power dynamic had completely reversed. She wasn't manipulating a powerless old farmer anymore. She was negotiating with the man who held her family's future in his hands. Brittany stood in the center of that crowd for what felt like 10 minutes but was probably 30 seconds. Everyone was waiting, neighbors, her parents, Connor, me. Finally she spoke. "I apologize." "To who?" I asked. To everyone here. I was wrong about farming. I was wrong about this community." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in that silence everyone heard it clearly. "And to Connor, I was wrong about your family's business." Connor nodded stiffly. The crowd began to murmur approval, but I wasn't finished. "Brittany, do you understand what you were asking Connor to give up?" "Yes." "Explain it to me." She took a shaky breath. "You've built a successful farming operation worth almost $2 million. The grain contracts provide steady income. Connor would inherit something valuable. And selling to the developers? Would give us immediate money but eliminate the long-term income and family legacy." Pete Richardson stepped closer. "Tom, what are your terms for the mortgage?" I pulled out a pre-written document from the envelope. I'd been hoping for this moment for weeks. "Mortgage modification agreement," I announced. "Current balance of $340,000. Reduced to $300,000. Interest rate reduced from 6.2% to 4%. Payment schedule extended from 15 years to 20 years. Carl Martinez was doing quick calculations in his head. What would that make the monthly payments? $1,800 instead of $2,700. Relief flooded his face. That's manageable. With conditions," I continued. "What conditions?" "First, no future public criticism of farming families or rural lifestyles." Brittany nodded quickly. "Second, Connor and Brittany will work on the farm during harvest season for the next 3 years. Learning the business, understanding the operation." "Tom," Brittany started to protest. "Those are the terms. Take them or face foreclosure." Connor spoke up. "I'd actually like that, Brittany. Learning the business side from Dad." "Third condition," I continued. "If Carl's construction business can get back on its feet, 20% of his net profits go toward early mortgage payment for the next 5 years. Carl nodded eagerly. "Absolutely. Tom, this is more than fair. Final condition. This arrangement stays between our families. No public discussion of the mortgage or these terms." I looked around at the crowd. "Same goes for everyone here. This is family business that happened to play out publicly, but the financial details remain private." Frank Patterson spoke for the group. "You've got our word, Tom." I turned back to Carl and Janet Martinez. "Do you accept these terms?" "Yes," Carl said immediately. "Thank you. This is incredibly generous." "Don't thank me yet. You still have to make the payments." I pulled out a pen and handed him the modification agreement. "Sign here." While Carl read through the document, I addressed the crowd. "Folks, I think the excitement's over. Might as well get back to enjoying the festival." People began to disperse, but slowly. They were still processing what they'd witnessed. A complete reversal of family power dynamics played out with mortgage documents and modification agreements. Sarah Wright lingered. "Tom, that was impressive planning. Sometimes you have to be prepared for confrontation. When did you know about their financial problems?" I suspected when Brittany started pushing so hard for the farm sale. Confirmed it when Pete mentioned distressed mortgages coming available. Pete Richardson was examining the signed modification agreement. "This is legitimate, Carl. You're legally protected as long as you make the payments." "What happens if I can't?" I answered honestly. "Standard foreclosure, but the new terms should make that unlikely." Connor had been quiet through this entire exchange. Now he spoke up. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How long have you been planning this?" "Since the day Brittany called farming slaving in mud. That's when I realized she didn't respect what we'd built." And you bought the mortgage specifically to have leverage? I bought the mortgage because it was a good investment. The leverage was a bonus. Brittany finally found her voice again. Tom, I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't understand. Brittany, here's what you need to understand. Connor and I aren't just farmers. We're businessmen who happen to farm. There's a difference. I see that now. Do you? Because 3 hours ago you were telling 200 people that we're backwards hicks who don't understand money. She winced. I was wrong. You were more than wrong. You were disrespectful to 4 generations of family business. Connor put his hand on my shoulder. Dad, she gets it now. I hope so, because this arrangement depends on mutual respect going forward. Carl Martinez had finished reading the mortgage modification. Tom, one question. Why are you being so generous with the terms? Because Connor loves your daughter, and I don't want family conflict, but mainly because I believe in second chances for people who acknowledge their mistakes. And if Brittany had refused to apologize, then you'd be losing your house Monday morning. The bluntness of that statement hung in the air. Janet Martinez spoke for the first time in 10 minutes. Tom, we'll make sure the payments are on time, every month. I know you will. Pete's bank will handle the processing, same as before. Pete nodded. I'll make sure everything's properly documented. I gathered up the papers and put them back in the manila envelope. All right then. Agreement signed, terms understood. Family drama resolved. Is it resolved? Connor asked. That depends on whether everyone learned something today. Brittany stepped forward. I learned that I married into a family that's more successful than I realized. And that attacking someone's livelihood is a stupid way to get what you want. Now you're getting it. The crowd had mostly dispersed by now, heading back to corn dogs and funnel cakes, but I could see the conversations happening, neighbors discussing what they'd witnessed, the complete reversal of expectations. Connor, I said, you still want to keep the farm? More than ever. Good, because we've got a harvest to finish. And that's when I knew we'd turned the corner. The consequences of that harvest festival confrontation played out over the following weeks in ways that surprised everyone, including me. The first change was immediate. Word spread through Riverside Township faster than a grass fire in August. By Monday morning, everyone within 50 miles knew that Tom Sullivan had bought his daughter-in-law's parents' mortgage and used it to shut down her campaign against farming. The reaction split along predictable lines. The farming families thought it was brilliant business strategy. Tom played chess while she was playing checkers, Frank Patterson told everyone at the cafe. Rural communities appreciate preparation and strategic thinking. The town business owners were impressed by the financial sophistication. Sarah Wright from the grain elevator started referring customers to me for investment advice. But not everyone approved. Some people thought I'd been too harsh, using financial leverage to win a family argument. My sister called from Omaha to tell me I was being unnecessarily dramatic. I didn't care. Sometimes you have to draw clear lines. The second consequence was Connor's attitude shift. Within a week, he was asking detailed questions about farm management that he'd never shown interest in before. Dad, walk me through the grain marketing strategy again. We contract 50% of our expected yield in March, another 30% in July, hold 20% for spot market sales. Why those percentages? Risk management guarantees minimum income while maintaining upside potential. Connor was taking notes. And the equipment replacement schedule? 8-year rotation on major machinery, 5 years on implements, depreciation benefits plus reliability. These were conversations we'd never had before. Brittany's attack on farming had inadvertently motivated Connor to understand the sophistication of our operation. The third consequence was Brittany herself. She kept her word about working harvest season, showing up every morning at 7 a.m. in work clothes I'd never seen her wear. The first day was rough. Connor put her on corn truck duty, driving loads from the field to the grain elevator. She complained about the dust, the noise, the long hours. By the third day, she was asking questions about moisture content and bushel weights. By the end of the week, she was calculating load values in her head. This truck carries 800 bushels, she told me proudly. At $4.50 per bushel, that's $3,600. Not bad. What about drying costs? 20 cents per bushel if moisture is above 15%. She was learning. More importantly, she was beginning to understand that farming involved real money and real business decisions. The fourth consequence was her parents' situation. Carl Martinez took the mortgage modification seriously, using the reduced payments to reinvest in his construction business. Within 6 weeks, he'd landed a contract for 3 house foundations. Not huge money, but steady work that covered his monthly obligations. "Tom," he told me at the bank one day, "this breathing room is exactly what I needed. I was drowning before. Just make the payments, Carl. That's all I care about. You'll get every dollar on time every month." He was true to his word. October payment, on time. November payment, 3 days early. The fifth consequence was community perception. The story of the Harvest Festival confrontation became local legend, but not in the way you might expect. Instead of seeing me as the vindictive father-in-law, most people viewed it as a masterclass in business preparedness. I started getting calls from other farmers asking about investment opportunities. "Tom, you got any more distressed mortgages available?" "Tom, teach me about buying agricultural contracts." Suddenly, I was the guy who'd turned family drama into profitable business strategy. The sixth consequence was Connor and Brittany's marriage. I'd been worried that my confrontation would create permanent tension between them. Instead, it seemed to clear the air. "Dad," Connor told me privately, "Brittany admits she was jealous of the farm. She thought it was taking me away from her. And now? Now she understands it's something we can build together." They started making long-term plans that included the farm, talking about building a house on the North 40, raising kids who'd grow up understanding agricultural business. The seventh consequence was the developer. When word got around that the Sullivan farm was definitely not for sale, they moved on to other properties. 3 months later, I heard they'd given up on the shopping center project entirely. Turns out they needed our 500 acres to make the development economically viable. Sometimes the best business decision is simply saying no. The final consequence was personal satisfaction. For 40 years, I had built something meaningful on this land. Watching Connor embrace that legacy, seeing Brittany learn to respect it, knowing the next generation would continue what 4 generations of Sullivans had started, that was worth more than any developer's offer. But the most surprising consequence came at Christmas dinner. Brittany brought me a gift. A framed photo of our farm taken from the air, with all 500 acres visible in one shot. The inscription read, "To Tom, thank you for teaching me the difference between making money and building wealth." That's when I knew the crisis was truly over. 6 months later, as I write this story, the farm is thriving in ways I never expected. Connor officially became farm manager in January, taking over daily operations while I focus on long-term planning and strategic investments. He's good at it. Better than I was at his age. The combination of mechanical knowledge from the dealership and business sense from our family gives him skills I had to learn separately. Brittany surprised everyone by enrolling in agricultural business classes at the community college. "If I'm going to be a farm wife," she told Connor, "I want to understand commodity markets and crop insurance." She's discovered she has a talent for financial analysis. Last month, she caught an error in our crop insurance calculation that saved us $4,000. More importantly, she's found her role in the operation. While Connor handles equipment and field management, Brittany manages contracts, marketing, and financial planning. They work together in ways I never imagined possible. The Martinez family mortgage is current and will remain so. Carl's construction business recovered enough to hire 2 employees, and he's been consistent with every payment. Janet sends me a thank you card every Christmas. The broader lesson here is about respect and preparation. Brittany made the mistake of attacking something she didn't understand. She saw dirt and equipment and assumed ignorance. She missed the financial sophistication, the strategic planning, the business relationships that make modern farming successful. But her bigger mistake was underestimating the person she was attacking. I'd spent 6 months quietly gathering information and positioning myself before she even started her campaign. While she was complaining about farm life, I was buying her parents' mortgage. While she was pushing Connor to sell, I was documenting our actual profitability. The confrontation at the Harvest Festival wasn't spontaneous. It was the culmination of careful preparation meeting the right opportunity. That's a lesson that applies beyond farming. Whether you're building a business, protecting your family, or defending your values, Preparation beats confrontation every time. Know your numbers. Understand your leverage. Be ready to prove your case with documentation, not just arguments. Most importantly, choose your battles carefully. I could have argued with Brittany about farming for years without changing her mind. Instead, I changed her circumstances. When someone attacks your livelihood, show them the business reality behind what they're criticizing. Connor learned this lesson too. He realized that inheriting a farm isn't about taking over old-fashioned work. It's about inheriting a sophisticated operation that requires constant learning and adaptation. "Dad," he told me recently, "I want to expand into organic certification for part of our acreage. Show me the numbers." He'd already done the research. Premium prices, growing market demand, certification costs, transition timeline. He's thinking like a businessman, not just a farmer. That's the real victory here. Not humiliating Brittany or saving the Martinez family from foreclosure, but watching Connor embrace the legacy with intelligence and ambition. The farm will continue for another generation, maybe several generations. The land that my great-grandfather homesteaded in 1872 will keep producing food, supporting families, and generating wealth for decades to come. But the bigger victory is family unity. Connor and Brittany are planning their future around the farm instead of around escaping it. They're building something together instead of tearing something down. Sometimes conflict leads to clarity. Sometimes confrontation leads to respect. And sometimes the best revenge is simply proving that what you've built is worth building. The developer's offer is long forgotten, but the lesson remains. Never underestimate someone who's been preparing longer than you've been planning. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family business conflicts or underestimated situations. Have you ever had someone attack something you'd worked hard to build? How did you handle it? Leave a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And if this story reminded you of your own family dynamics, hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories about the intersection of family, business, and respect. Thanks for listening, and remember, you can't buy character, but you can definitely lose it.